Hey YouTube, how you doing? It's Max. In this video, I'm going to be talking a lot about religion. I was debating whether or not to make a video about this, but I figured that, this is probably something I would inevitably talk about, just because what I'm about to say in this video has greatly influenced my current self. And, so I think it's like important for, to talk about this on this channel, but I do know that this kind of topic with religion can be a bit touchy. Considering, at this point, um, I'll probably make a video about anything. I can't really see, this being something that's too surprising to talk about. And I'll try to keep it, as mindful as possible of other people who have differing opinions. But because this is, a topic of religion, which is very controversial. This is mostly meant to capture my own opinions, but if this is something that you don't want to watch or listen to, I don't want to. I don't have any intents of starting any flame wars in the comments section about does God exist or does God not exist. This is mostly my opinions and basically my thought processes of religion while growing up. So this is something you don't want to listen to, then I'd probably give this one a pass. But um, for people who don't want to hear all the details as well, if you just want like a quick like, what are my thoughts? The too long didn't read version. Um, it's pretty much like this, I guess. I would define myself as an atheist. I was raised Christian and I don't have any qualms with anyone who is religious, and we just coexist and life is good, that kind of stuff. And I do want to define atheism, at least in my perspective. This could be a completely wrong opinion of what atheism is, but I I feel like atheism kind of inspires a red flag in some people. So I kind of want to explain this definition a bit from my perspective. It's pretty much I don't believe in any gods across any religion. I don't believe that any religion is correct in defining a God that exists in our current reality. Um, I'm open to the possibility of there being a God, but I believe that this would have to be proven based on the criteria in which everything else in our reality is proven by, which I would say is facts, data, um, complements that of our understanding of the natural sciences, like things. What I mean by complements is pretty much like something that's incongruent. I don't know if incongruence is the right word to explain it, but something that I guess complements how we see, the natural world, uh, the most up to date kind of stuff, any psychological sciences, the humanistic sciences, that kind of stuff. Ultimately, I think that from a logical perspective, it's the religion's job to meet a burden of proof, to prove whether or not God exists or not. I don't think that it's up to the non-believer to meet a burden of proof to disprove God, if that makes sense. Uh, Much like I don't believe that in a debate setting, I don't think that it's a non-believer's job to disprove something like Bigfoot, if that makes sense. And through my definitions, you might have picked up that I've said that I'm open to the possibility of there being a God out there. And this could, and some people might say that this is an agnostic point of view, that I'm agnostic, not an atheist. But in my opinion, um, being an agnostic is when your belief is rooted in the idea that nothing can be known of the existence of God, and that an agnostic, from my opinion, again, would claim that they neither believe nor disbelieve in God. They're kind of on the fence, whereas I am saying that my belief is that there is no God. So that's where I differ from an agnostic, I believe, and I think that through this kind of deduction of ruling out possible gods, if you apply that formula to any god out there, um, then you'll come to the conclusion that no god it has been currently proven to exist. There, as of the publishing of this video, Therefore there is no God, and that's my stance, I guess. So like as mentioned before, I think that it is possible for a God to be proven, but with incredible claims of, super powerful, supernatural omniscience, omnipresence, all that kind of stuff. With these supernatural claims and incredible claims require incredible amounts of evidence to support such claims. And I guess, in my opinion, I have yet to come across any piece of evidence or an argument for God's existence that is incontrovertible, which means that uh, it can't be disproven. Every single claim that I've come across is not airtight, if you know what I mean. And because of this, I guess I'm confident in my stance of complete disbelief in all gods until one meets the burden of proof. Um, so, with that all said, I'll spend the remainder of this video kind of chronicling my journey of becoming an atheist, and I guess that's kind of what this video is about. So, at an early age, I remember one of my first kind of thoughts, I guess, that I remember that's kind of resonated with me. I remember we went to Disney World when I was like 4 or 5 years old, really young. And my mom told me that I asked her why all the characters were just real people dressed in costumes. And she took this as a sign that I was like this doesn't really have anything to do with religion right now, but it's meant to kind of set up that I was this very skeptical kid growing up. So like, this is something that she's told me time and time again, that I never believed that the characters at the Disney World park were the actual people. I always thought of them as just people in costumes, which is, I guess, an interesting note that I kind of wanted to start this off with, just to kind of not have the entire thing be religion based. It's kind of related, and I guess you'll see why. And I also remember like before we had like iPhones or like handheld means of like recording cameras, that we would carry around on a daily basis with like, editing technology at the ready. My dad used to have this kind of like video magic that he would do. So what we would kind of do is we would hide something under a blanket, or I would like throw something up in the air, and then he would pause the camera, and we would either take the thing out of the from underneath the blanket, or the thing that went in the air would fall and go off screen. And then after that happened, we would be in like a freeze formation, and after that happened, we'd put the play button on, and it would be like this video magic trick, right? And so I remember like this kind of stuff. I remember seeing magic tricks, like card tricks, where you'd be like pick a card, and they'd find your card, and it would be like kind of an amazing thing. And like throughout like all these kinds of experiences, I was never really conditioned, I guess, to believe that magic existed. I was always told that magic was fake. So when there was like a magic trick, um they would be like there would be like a reason why it wasn't true. And this kind of setup made me, I guess, not really. Uh, I was skeptical of believing in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy because, if magic tricks weren't real, then why would Santa or the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy, these creatures that were, magic was their identity and I've never seen them, why would they be real if, magic wasn't real? So that's kind of, I guess, my logical thought. Um, and so I remember this kind of feeling growing up of like, I didn't believe in like Santa or the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy, but like all my classmates did in like kindergarten. And I was told not to tell other kids, like I was in on this secret that only adults knew. And I guess it was this kind of feeling of like, why are people trying to condition these people to live these blissfully ignorant kind of lives? And it was only in a matter of time where I was kind of putting the, um, two and two together, I guess you could say, and then taking it a step further and applying this to religion. And, I didn't really understand this feeling of, blissfully ignorant or all these kinds of thoughts. I was just like a little kid, but I remember knowing that, something was fake about Santa or the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy or magic tricks. And I remember seeing people would who were widely believed in Santa or these magic tricks. Um, and this like later on applies to like psychics and like stuff like that. And I think it was just this. I started detecting like a pattern between all these different things, and that's what ultimately led me to start questioning religion. Hopefully that makes sense. Sorry. I remember it was like around like 7 or 8 years old where I first asked my parents if God existed. And to this day, my parents are devout Christians. And I remember at the time when I was 7 or 8, it was a very quick interaction. I basically said something along the lines of, if Santa doesn't exist, then does God exist? And I remember them assuring me that God exists. I don't remember all the quotes, but I remember I like asked a second time. I was like, I just wanted to be sure because, I didn't want to be fooled into thinking that God existed like all these other kids were fooled into thinking that Santa existed, and they grow up and they're like, oh, Santa doesn't exist. I just wanted to know the real answer. And again, my parents assured me that God existed. He's not like Santa, he exists. And I think we just left it at that. And it was like the first time going into that conversation, I was sure that God didn't exist. I thought it was just another, I thought I was smart. I thought I just figured it out. I was like, oh, you guys are just pulling the wool over my eyes. But no, they were very certain. Like they had, like, I trusted that my parents were, true about Santa's existence. And they were, right, that Santa didn't exist. And now I was, trusting that God actually did exist at this time. And I remember at the time even I didn't really see how Santa and God were that different. Like they were both magical beings, and everyone said that magic didn't exist, but God was like I guess the exception to the rule. And something about that didn't compute. And Santa and God both watched you while you slept. They watched you while you were awake. They both rewarded people who believed in them, and they both punished people who didn't believe in them. So from my like perspective as a kid, sorry, my nose is like super itchy right now. I guess just like my perspective as a kid, I just didn't see how that would be like to this day. I was still like convinced, like I don't know where the disconnection, how people see the difference. But I remember, this was kind of like my thought growing up. But I went to several like churches throughout my childhood, so I'm transitioning now from like I guess what I would talk about with my parents at like a very young age to now, my experiences with church and I guess growing up as a little kid and stuff like that. So like I remember going to these modern churches, and I describe them as like non-denominational modern churches, and they were churches that had like game cubes in them, where you could play GameCube. I remember we played a lot of like Super Smash Brothers Melee, and we played a lot of like Super Mario Strikers, those kinds of games. Um, Before service started, and these churches had like rock bands, where like young adults would be playing instruments, like people like kids in high school, and young adults like maybe like college students or recent grads would be giving sermons to the kids. These are the kind of places that were kind of hip. They had lock-ins, which are these like kind of events where you would go spend the night at churches. And there would be like these all-nighter parties where you could just eat junk food and drink soda and watch movies all night. And I remember one church I even went to had this miniature skate park in it with like a little like ramp and stuff and basketball hoops. And I mean, it was just like a cool hangout place for kids. And it was definitely like a very welcoming environment. Everyone was very like, positive all the time and just so, happy to talk about God. And it was just kind of like this thing that was very similar to school, but it had like all these incentives to go to it, such as the video games, the half pipes, the cool bands, the music, all that stuff. So it was like the cool school, if you will. And they had all these messages about not doing drugs and being a good person. So you think that like this is definitely like it's like conditioning. What's there it doesn't really make you question what you're being told when you're at church. I guess it's very just when I was growing up, in like questioning this, I used to always call it like it's almost like brainwashing in a way. There's like so many like incentives to go and to learn, and people that are nice. There aren't really any um, incentives to question it. And my parents were always talking about how church is the most important thing, God's the most important thing. He's the reason why we're alive. He's the reason what we're living for, and when we die, we go to heaven. All that stuff. And so, in elementary school, um, you know, we're going to lock-ins and stuff, and I'm trying to find. They're always telling you recruit people when you're at church to come to these lock-ins, to come to church. And I remember I would talk to some kids, and I'd be like, "Hey, do you want to go to church with me sometime?" And they were kids who were, not Christian, or their parents didn't believe in God whatsoever. And oh my gosh, my nose is so itchy. Sorry. And what was I talking about? Oh yeah, kids who went to church. Kids who didn't go to church. I was trying to recruit them to go to church, and I remember, these people just basically telling me that they're not Christian, and like that kind of was like interesting to me, because here I was as a kid thinking that everyone believed in God, but only like some people believed in God. And some other kids, they said they were Christian, but that their churches weren't the same as my church. Like they had to be very like, it was very proper at their churches. They had to dress up in like suits and stuff. And it was just like the first time I had heard these different perspectives of religion. And I started to realize, I guess, that by going back to the thing about like my parents ensuring me that God exists, and I'm here learning that like maybe God exists, but not everyone believes in him. And if it's such like a, like I started to think about the whole Santa Claus thing. Am I approaching this wrong? But I didn't really think about it a lot as a kid. It was just something that was always in the back of my mind. And looking at this, like looking back at this as like an adult, I definitely feel like as a kid I had this subconscious thought in my head during the time where I was devaluing other people's beliefs, which I kind of don't, I'm kind of ashamed of that kind of like thought as a kid, devaluing these other people's beliefs. Like I was thinking that my beliefs were superior, that all I had to do was get these people to go to church with me, and I could like save them, because that's what you're taught in church. And like I was saying, they don't really have any reason for you to question that, but you sort of have this consequence in your worldview that you're kind of subconsciously devaluing other people's beliefs. Maybe it was just me, but I definitely noticed that as a kid. And I thought that, my parents were, they believed in the correct religion. It didn't really like come to my attention at this age that they may not have been correct. You know, um, you kind of trust your parents as you grow up. And so, yeah, not knowing how vast and diverse religions are when you're in elementary school, uh, you know, as 9/11 hit, and this was back in 2001, and I think I was like 7 years old. So, like I said, around this time, 7 or 8, when I first asked my parents if God existed, there was this general fear of Muslims, I remember. And it was strange to me, because there were like, people who were Muslims in my school, yet you'd hear all the time about how like Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein were, considered like some of the most evil people on the planet at the time. And at the time, I don't really understand what the difference is between Muslims or Al Qaeda or the Taliban. It's all kind of just like the Middle East in my mind. As a young kid who is being told that God is good, the Christianity is the correct religion, and so all these other people, I guess, are just being grouped into umbrellaed into one term, just like the other religion in my mind. And this is before I even like learned about like Buddhism or Hinduism, as like a 7-year old. And I grew up in Virginia, so is very like religious area as well. So most people in the area are very Christian. Also, in elementary school, we started learning about like Virginia history. And if you know anything about Virginia history, there's a lot of slavery in Virginia history. So I remember learning about, all these slave owners who are Christian, who are owning slaves out of like their right to own slaves. And um I remember that being like, that's an evil act. And but it's making me kind of like question, like, are are Christians all good, like, because if I guess what I'm trying to say is that there were just complications, especially coming from me who is half black, half white. That makes me question my own, like, kind of racial background of, like, my mom's family's white, my dad's family's black. That why is like what's the connection? This is me again trying to put myself back in my like 7-year-old mind of like why why aren't we talking about like the Christian element here? We're just saying, oh, it was a bad moment in history, but these people were doing it for God. And I guess my thought, what I'm trying to say is that, like, just because these people were doing it in like the name of God, of their religion, that kind of shows how people can be incorrect in their beliefs, their justifications, if that makes sense. So I think that was like the age where I was first kind of like learning about like kind of like the flaws of Christianity on like a historical context, if that makes sense. And then, in middle school, you start learning a little bit more about like Constantine, where, there are these countries and armies that are praying to their god for victory, and they win the war, and then they give the credit to God on the battlefield, and they use that as evidence to prove that God existed. And it made me kind of wonder, like, especially when it's like, a Christian society versus another Christian society, or maybe it's two nations that aren't even Christian. Why how is God picking the winner? And I remember also, I played a lot of hockey during these days, and I remember trying this when I was growing up, like praying for victory before a match, and sometimes I'd win and sometimes I'd lose, and it was it didn't really seem like there was any connection to me praying that impacted the result. So I was asking my parents and my youth pastor, like, why did people pray um, if it doesn't really impact anything? And they told me that God works in mysterious ways. And I had just many doubts growing up, um, but ultimately I think it was just so ingrained growing up that God existed, that I was just thought of it as, maybe I'm incorrect somewhere, um, along the lines everyone seems like they have this figured out, and maybe I just need to have more faith. And I remember at church we'd have these little ceremonies that would occur like every month or so, where they would kind of have everyone kind of close their eyes for everyone's I guess I wouldn't say safety or security, but I guess just for their well-being. Everyone can close their eyes, and if you haven't accepted Jesus yet into your life, you can raise your hand and come up to the front, take communion, all that stuff. And I remember the first couple times I didn't really do that because I was kind of embarrassed. But it came to this point, and I remember I was probably like 8 or 9 years old. Um, and I was like, I'm going to do this like every single time just to ensure that I God knows that I'm faithful. And so I would do this a couple times, and I kept doing the praying thing, and I still kept noticing that there was no real correlation to my prayer and the desired effect, and it was always, God works in mysterious ways. Um, and so I guess growing up through middle school, I would say that I was skeptical of how God worked and his existence. And I basically just convinced myself that I was, just not, I was never faithful enough. There was always people that were more faithful than me. And I guess I just kept trying to get to know him better. Um, and I just kept feeling like there was nothing there. So in high school, I started taking classes, and this caused me to question things way more critically. Like, this is where I kind of learned what critical thinking was, I guess, for the first time. And in high school, there was better access with the internet. Because in the early 2000s, like, you had like there was internet, but it wasn't really like good internet, and I didn't really know how to research things until high school. So, some notable classes I remember taking in high school that kind of influenced this perspective was like Earth Science, AP Biology, AP Psychology, AP World History, Sociology, Philosophy, and Programming. And while this is a lot of classes, I'll kind of talk about a little bit about each of them. So the science classes, like earth science, that kind of taught me the approximate age of the earth, and this was something that I didn't really ever think about before. And if you calculate like the age of the earth compared to like the Bible or whatever, you learn that it's like 4,000 years old. That was like calculated by some like monk or something. And this was a contradiction: billions of years versus 4,000 years. And then you kind of learn about Adam and Eve and how those were the first people. But then in AP biology, you're learning all about this evolution and how people are um, being evolving over a period of tens of thousands of years, millions of years, really. And basically like concepts like DNA and how like we can kind of like calculate like all the different mutations and all this kind of like intricate stuff that it's taking you're spending time learning this stuff in school at a very like it's an AP level class. So I comparing and contrasting scientific understanding that I was being taught with this religious understanding that I'm being taught, I just noticed contradictions. And so I would start asking my parents, like, why are we going to school to learn this stuff that's, contradicting with stuff you're learning in church? And I'm kind of putting the clues together that, there's a reason why kids are forced to go to school, but not forced to go to church. And that's why everyone's free to have a different opinion with their religion. But when it comes to getting an education and getting accredited for things, I was noticing those kinds of like if you're going to go to apply to college, they don't really care about um, you memorizing Bible verses, but they do care about you remembering like evolution and DNA and stuff like that. So I guess I was just it started causing me to question this more because it's a very important topic. I think that if you're living your life for God or something, then you should probably like make sure that what you're um, you know instructing other people to do is actually correct and not just an opinion that people from 2,000 years ago had. So, pretty much like what I want to get out of this point with science here is that there are many people that claim that these aren't really contradictions and that both perspectives can exist without like there being any fallacy. And I would disagree with this because I think that if you actually believe, and this is where I'm kind of might be getting controversial, but I think that if you actually believe that there is like um, there's science and then there's God, and that both of those can, coexist with one another. I feel like that's just cherry picking certain arguments from your religion, and you're not really seeking the truth without any acknowledging your bias. And for me, growing up, I thought that that was not a life I wanted to live by. I wanted to, know the truth and not really have any sort of biases going into this. And so this earth science of the age of the earth really helped confirm this biological science. And you start to see all these different subjects of school starting to intertwine and sort of validate each other. And so the biological science helped confirm the psychological science with evolution and learning concepts like human behavior and how we behaved in certain ways and why we have instincts that have evolved over all the years to help our ancestors survive in societies and stuff like that. And this really was an argument with the idea that these were all just implanted by God, that God has created each one of us individually, when there's all this evidence that kind of supports these uh, evolution of behavior um, psychologies. And so with psychology, then you got world history and sociology, and so you see these societies kind of evolving over time, and you see how history has kind of shaped our modern society. And I remember how humans evolved from hunter gatherers to farmers, and there's this complex kind of just history in all this. And I learned how Christianity's history was just one sliver of history. There were all these other histories, like you learn about kind of like all the people that the people in the Old Testaments were at odds with, and then you learn in world history how these people just had their own religions. They weren't evil inherently, like they were kind of portrayed as in the Bible, in the biblical stories. And it starts to really have me question this kind of like, we're starting to learn these like us versus them mentalities. And the more I kind of learn about this stuff, the more I'm just kind of remembering how Christianity was just this us versus them mentality, and we need to convert them. um, and you learn about Christian societies that rise to power. You learn about non-Christian societies that rose to power, how everyone loses power. And it's just this like cycle of history. It doesn't really matter how religious someone is. um, it's just kind of like, it just happened to be that Christianity was a religion that rose to power in the West, and we live in the West, and that's why we're Christian, essentially. And then, as you're learning all this sociology and history, then you're learning about philosophy and all these different philosophers having all these different opinions on like the existence of God. And but not even just religious or theological debates, but just tons of debates in general about like what's a ethical life, all this kind of stuff. And you start to learn that like ethics and morality is kind of dependent on your own culture and your own bias. And through philosophy, you're kind of learning how to formulate logical arguments and debate. And this ties into programming, because in order to program a computer, you need to um, in order to program a program, you need to use logical arguments that are without flaw. And so, when you start applying all these kinds of concepts to your debates and to your life, you can start kind of picking apart your own biases. And so, I would use this logic as a key to really truly discovering if God existed or not. And, at this time, I was doing a lot of questioning, and, my communication skills still need some work. But back then, I was really, definitely not as well of was not a good communicator. And so I would I would try to use what I've learned with formulating these premises and um, logical arguments to set up my own hypotheses and test them over and over again. And part of this testing, going back to the communication thing, was to question my pastors, question my parents. And I really just wanted to know what the truth of all of this was. And I don't know if like people were just not prepared, or people didn't really care as much as I cared, because at the time I thought I was the only person who really truly cared about this. And I kept thinking that people were either blindly confident that God existed, or that people were blindly faithful and just accepting of their own ignorance. I wasn't really quite sure what I was. It's hard for me to really remember exactly what I thought 10 years ago or 10 plus years ago. But I remember one of my discussions vivid, like this is just an example of something that I talked about with a pastor. I went to several different churches that weren't even the churches my family went to, just to see like what other churches were teaching, and talk to different pastors just to kind of gather a sample size. And one of the churches I went to was one of my friend's churches, and I was talking to the pastor and questioning just questioning everything. And he told me to sit in a chair, and his conclusion was that by sitting in this chair, I had faith that the chair would support me, and that this somehow proved that I should just have faith in God's existence. And I feel like there's a lot of like logical fallacy in this argument, because I it's not that I had faith that the chair would support me. It's that I've sat in many chairs in my life, and from this past experience, I knew that the chair would support me, therefore I sat in it. It wasn't that I had blind faith, because I feel like with God, it's more about blind faith as opposed to all these different events in my life supporting my faith in Him. Um, and maybe that's just me, because feel like I haven't really had an experience where God has impacted my life that couldn't be, as I said earlier, couldn't be explained by something else. So overall, just during this time, I tried to surround myself with different content. I would go to they had Wednesday Bible study meetings, and I would try to go to those just to kind of, meet people and talk about it. And the interesting thing that I was like coming to the conclusion of was that no one really wanted to talk about if God existed. People just wanted more confirmation that God did exist. And I started to feel like I was kind of like an outsider in some of these religious um, kind of meetings, like Bible study and stuff like that, because um, it wasn't really I would describe it as, like in an academic setting where you're trying to pick apart arguments to find a truth. I feel like the religious environment was the opposite of that, where instead of trying to pick apart arguments to try and find a truth, it was trying to reassure people that something existed rather than trying to prove that something existed, if that makes sense. So ultimately, this caused immense amount of friction with my relationship with my parents and brother, who were all very devout Christians. And I was in this place where I was just so passionate in discovering the truth, and they were in a place where they were just so passionate about preserving and maintaining their beliefs that neither of us really like none of us really acted the best that we probably could have throughout this time. And I remember feeling like I was constantly this burden to my family, and it was constantly my fault for bringing up religion. And it was just something that was, oh, sorry. Um, oh, I guess I'm not recording my screen, but it was just well, I'll just repeat that because I kind of broke that. But so like neither me nor my parents probably acted the best in this situation. But I remember feeling like it was constantly my fault for bringing up religion, and if the existence of God was this key to eternal life, um, we were only alive for, some of us are alive not that long, but if we're only alive for like 100 years tops, then eternity is forever, and it's very valuable to use our time while we're alive wisely if God exists in the way that they saw that he did. Especially if like the consequence is this eternal damnation. I thought that this was a very important conversation to have, and to really just come to the to the find the truth, because here my parents are, um, essentially I'm worried that they're wasting all this time on earth just kind of going to church all the time and just doing Bible study all the time. Everything is God based. And they were trying to preserve that, and I was trying to basically just find flaws in this, like flaws in anything, flaws in atheism, flaws in Islam, flaws in Christianity, just try and pick apart every single perspective to try and find which one was the truth. And they just didn't want to, it's pretty obvious, like not many people would want to, explore this, that they might be wrong. But part of me just felt ultimately just so isolated during this time, because I felt like I was the only one who was really questioning themselves and trying to improve my own worldview. And I felt like I was the only person who just, um, really cared if God existed or not. And, it was this true or false statement. Like, does God exist? Either he exists or he doesn't. And if he does, that explains why we exist. If he doesn't exist, then why do we exist? What's our purpose and what's the meaning of life? And this was just like what consumed my thoughts in high school. And, I don't want to go into too much of the details about like certain like critical conversations we've had or just key events, because one, this was a very traumatic time in my life, and it lasted a bit beyond high school as well. And two, I don't want to paint the picture of my parents or anyone in my family in a negative light, because ultimately they're good people, and at the time they're just trying to do what's best for their family. And having been able to process this for many years, um, it's understandable how both parties acted. I don't think that either side is necessarily like better or worse than the other. I think that we're all just people trying to be people. And I would say that currently my parents and I have a good relationship, healthy relationship, and I'm thankful to have them in my life still, and that these experiences didn't like tear apart or like ruin our family or anything, and very fortunate that they're able to respect my beliefs and I'm able to respect their beliefs. um, I just think that the consequences of these events have really impacted myself, and I wouldn't be the same person I am today if I never went through this. And so on one end, I think that it was kind of a sucky situation to go through, but ultimately, it's important, so that's why I'm sharing it. I don't want to come across as if anyone's right or wrong. This is just kind of like my thoughts growing up. So I just wanted to insert that disclaimer, just so you can be aware. If you're still watching this, 40 minutes in, you can be aware I still got a bit to go. So buckle up if you're still interested. But um, I guess overly, this has impacted my life in ways where I feel overly cautious nowadays. Um, I've noticed this in myself. I feel cautious about voicing my opinions or sharing something that I'm passionate about. And I feel like, if someone disagrees with me, then I'm always worried if I'm offending them. Just based on like these conversations of me being so passionate about this and feeling like, I'm constantly offending people, um, with my passion for like trying to find truth in the whole religion does God exist thing. And I guess like nowadays, I notice that I feel very distant from people. I feel like I have a lot of like unique interests or passions, um, that most people don't really share with me. And I want to feel like, yeah, I have this like kind of desire in myself to feel like I'm being heard. And sometimes it does disappoint me when people just aren't really open to being interested in something that I'm passionate about, because I feel like we aren't gonna able ever be able to really connect on that deep level if people aren't really like interested. And I think this all kind of stems from these events. um, and I think that like through this, I very much value communication, not as a tool to like just present ideas, but also just if there is conflict in my life with other people, I think that communication is a very good tool at reaching mutual understandings and compromises. And overall, I think that like this kind of stuff has led to me to kind of escape into my own head a lot, often through like world building or character creation as these coping mechanisms. Because when you're growing up with these kind of like atheist kind of views and trying to dismantle the truth, it's kind of isolates people. So I noticed that I would start to kind of try to form these characters that would kind of check myself, because I just stopped trusting other people's opinions um, growing up. And so, you know, it was just something that, like, especially when I'm feeling alone and feeling bad, it's just some like being able to create worlds and being able to create characters is just something that I can control without worrying about like hurting anyone else or offending anyone else. And I can start to establish these rules and kind of, especially with like programming or something, you can, if the computer tells you you're wrong, then you're wrong, and the computer is this logically sound, unbiased source. So I started to like gravitate towards that kind of stuff. And you know through storytelling, you can sort of reveal pieces of yourself. And if you need like someone to like kind of tell you that everything's okay, you can kind of create a character who can be that character for you in your life. And so like, while I am thankful for like and I'm blessed to have family and friends who love me and who care about me and who support me, I'm thankful for having a great wife who supports me and everything. I do feel like these characters that I've created over the course of the 27 years of my existence are probably some of the best friends I've had, because they were there with me in these times where I was pretty much at rock bottom, going through these experiences with religion. And I know that they are like fictitious, and sometimes I joke about how they're my imaginary friends and they're more than just characters and stuff like that. But I remember growing up during this time, there was this added kind of weight of feeling super embarrassed by the thought of having these imaginary friends as coping techniques, um, because I knew they were fictitious, and I felt like, especially going through high school, I feel like you're always getting judged and stuff like that. It just felt like, and I was already kind of like made fun of for liking like nerdy things. So it was just one of these things that like that would be social suicide if I ever revealed that growing up. But I guess just like looking back on, my life so far, just having that as like a coping uh, tool, which just left such a profound impact on my life. And it's this thing that like I feel like no one will ever really truly get to experience the feelings that I have felt with these kinds of imaginary friend characters that I've created. And I guess why I think this is a very interesting idea, because in the end of the day, this is how I kind of learned to cope with the idea that people can still be religious, um, and where there's a logical sense in that. So, like, I see God as this fictional imaginary friend, essentially. And there's a base set of rules where God operates, and it can be really personal. And it's just this imaginary friend that anyone can have. And with this personal, profound experience, and our imagination as humans are just it's this incredible feature of humanity, that allows us to fabricate fictional universes and stories and characters and leave such long lasting impacts on our lives. I think that it's overall very difficult to explain why we love um, some of these things so much, like why humans love, God, and why they're so religious, or why people are so interested in like certain Marvel characters or anime characters, or in my situation, these imaginary friends or fictional characters I've created. And this overall feeling, I think, can feel so divine or sacred to the individual that, kind of, if it's like questioned too much or criticized, um, it can, we are very defensive naturally in defending what we hold to be divine or sacred. Um, and that's why I noticed that I kind of get like kind of upset if like, people don't really like care that much about my stuff, or if people, I understand why people get upset if I, looking back why I was critiquing their religious stances logically, um, so I just kind of wanted to, talk about that kind of similarity in, I guess, passion for something that may not be able to be proven, but the feeling is still real, if that makes sense. And so I'm currently, 50 minutes, almost 50 minutes into the video. We should probably wrap this up soon. I guess ultimately I want to, just summarize that, currently I'm an atheist. I don't currently believe in the existence of God. I don't believe in the existence of my imaginary friends. And I think that, however, I believe that our imagination can create these very real experiences. I think that, having God in your life, or me having these imaginary friends in my life, is just something that's so profound, and that no one can really take that experience away from you. And I think that having something that you can call your own, um, is just very special to have. And I think that, we all come from different corners of the world. I think that we're all just trying to figure out life, who we are, why we're here, what happens when we inevitably die. And I think that, there's this idea, I think the idea of dying and there not being anything is depressing. But I think that the idea of hell being a real thing is vastly more depressing. I think that, ultimately, I'm just a grain of sand in the grand scheme of the universe. I don't really think that I have everything figured out. And perhaps, the universe is the size of a grain of sand in the grand scheme of something that's unfathomable to me to comprehend. Maybe that something is God, but I just don't think that we need to assign um, that kind of baggage to something so unfathomable to God. I don't think that God, uh, it's I don't think it makes sense to really define that unknown variable as God, especially when it contains all this baggage. I think that is, and that can be so personal. I think it's just good to, whether you believe it or not, and then, you know, that's kind of it. At the end of the day, I don't really know the answers. I don't think that anyone else really knows the answers. But if you've seen other videos of mine where I relate things to the Dunning-Kruger effect, then I think that I have researched this topic over the course of my life enough times to, I guess, safely say that I am no longer in that area of Mount Stupid. And I'm sure that, like, I'm not saying that because I'm an atheist, I'm the only one that I think that there's plenty of people who are very religious who also are no longer on that Mount Stupid. I'm not trying to target either side, but essentially all I'm saying is that I have, you know, done enough research for myself to safely feel confident in saying that I don't need to explore this anymore. And I can commit my life to, what principles I have found are important to me. And from this moment on, I'll remain an atheist until further evidence presents itself. And that's just how I operate. And that's just, my opinions. Everyone else is free to their own opinions. If God exists, then I guess I'll see you in hell. Um, have a good one. Sorry this is so long. Hopefully it didn't offend anyone. But yeah, later days.